When most people hear ICE, they picture a deportation officer, an arrest, cuffs, a quick takedown, like the roadside scene on screen. But that's only half the story. Inside the same agency is Homeland Security Investigations, HSI, the criminal investigation side. They work cases like cybercrime, human trafficking, cross-border smuggling, and even stolen art and antiquities. So it's one badge, but two very different jobs. Officially, there are other pieces too, like the agency's lawyers, but the big internal push and pull is HSI versus ERO, often competing for attention, funding, and public identity. Here's our roadmap. How ICE was created in 2003, how the agency splits between HSI and ERO, and why some people argue for reform, while others argue ICE should be dismantled or rebuilt entirely. To understand the headlines, you have to understand the structure. After 9/11, the Homeland Security Act created DHS, and on March 1st, 2003, ICE was stood up by combining investigative pieces of the old US Customs Service with interior immigration enforcement from the old INS. Today, ICE says it runs on an annual budget of about $8 billion and employs more than 20,000 people. But inside the building, it can feel like two different worlds sharing one logo. On one side, HSI, the investigators. Their work looks like classic federal casework, following money, devices, shipments, and networks that cross borders. On the other side, ERO, the enforcement arm. They arrest, detain, and remove people under immigration law. And they're the face of the political fight. That split is the key to understanding ICE. So let's rewind to where it started. To understand why ICE can feel like two agencies at once, we have to go back to its birth. And here's the key. Before 2003, ICE didn't exist. The catalyst was 9/11. In the aftermath, Washington pushed a major reorganization around one idea: Homeland Security. On November 25, 2002, President George W. Bush signed the Homeland Security Act. That law created the Department of Homeland Security, DHS. DHS was built by combining all or parts of 22 different federal agencies under one umbrella. For immigration enforcement and services, that meant the old setup was about to be broken apart. Before DHS, one agency wore almost every hat: the INS, the Immigration and Naturalization Service. It handled immigration benefits and naturalization, and it also did immigration enforcement. Critics said that mix was a built-in conflict: customer service on one side, policing on the other. So on March 1st, 2003, INS was disbanded, and its functions were split into three new agencies inside DHS. First, USCIS, US Citizenship and Immigration Services. They're the benefit side, processing things like green cards and naturalization. Second, CBP, Customs and Border Protection. They're the front door, ports of entry, airports and the border, inspecting people and goods coming in. Third, ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. ICE is the inside game, investigations and immigration enforcement away from the border. And that's where the two faces get baked in. ICE was created by merging investigative pieces from the former US Customs Service and INS with INS's interior enforcement operations. So one agency inherited two different job identities. One side is investigative, building cases on cross-border crime. The other side is enforcement, detention, removals, and the day-to-day mechanics of immigration policing. That 2003 design choice doesn't explain everything about ICE today, but it's a big reason the agency's mission can feel split down the middle. To understand the debate, we have to open the hood. ICE isn't one machine. It's two very different engines bolted together. On screen, you're seeing the split. HSI, Homeland Security Investigations, and ERO, Enforcement and Removal Operations. They sit under the same agency leadership, but they operate in different legal lanes. Start with HSI. Think federal detectives. Their work is primarily criminal investigations, closer in field to the FBI or DEA than to a typical immigration office. And the mandate is huge. HSI works cases like cyber and financial crime, trafficking and child exploitation. They also run a cultural property program, investigations that have helped return more than 20,000 stolen objects to over 40 countries and institutions since 2007. HSI also works globally. ICE describes an international network of 90-plus offices in more than 50 countries. When HSI builds a case, it's the criminal system. Evidence, prosecutors, federal court, and, if they win, prison time. Now the other half, ERO. These are the enforcers focused on civil immigration law. If you're looking at a detention transport, a detention facility, or a removal flight, that's ERO's world. ERO manages the arrest, detention, and removal of non-citizens. And here's the key contrast. HSI is usually building criminal cases for conviction. ERO is processing civil immigration cases for removal, sometimes involving the same person, but through a different system. Because ERO operates largely in the civil system, it often uses administrative warrants, paper signed inside the agency, not by a federal judge. And when a case goes to immigration court, it isn't a criminal jury trial. It's a proceeding before an immigration judge in the DOJ's immigration court system. Connecting the two is OPLA, the Office of the Principal Legal Advisor. Think of them as ICE's in-house lawyers. ERO initiates the removal case. OPLA litigates it on behalf of DHS, and the immigration judge decides the outcome. But here's where the friction starts. They share the ICE brand, so the reputation of one sticks to the other. For HSI agents, wearing an ICE jacket can be a liability, especially when they're trying to work sensitive cases with local partners. And this wasn't just gossip. In 2024, HSI moved to emphasize its own identity, launching branding and messaging that highlighted HSI and DHS more than ICE, after years of complaints that the ICE label could shut doors in some jurisdictions. So when people ask, is ICE good or bad, they're often talking past each other, conflating two missions under one roof. One side fights transnational crime. The other side enforces civil immigration removal. The real question is structural. Should they stay bolted together or be separated?
We have to separate the political slogan from the operational reality. If you believe in the rule of law, court orders have to mean something. When an immigration judge issues a final removal order, there has to be a mechanism to carry it out.
So you view the agency primarily as the arm of the court system.
It's the enforcement arm of the immigration system. Courts decide the case. ERO executes the outcome. And in late 2024, ICE figures reported about 1.45 million people on the non-detained docket with final removal orders. That's not abstract. It's a caseload. And abolishing an agency doesn't erase that docket. It just shifts the risk and the workload somewhere else.
But the critics aren't just talking about paperwork. They're talking about who is being targeted.
Then let's talk numbers. In FY 2024, ICE reported 113,431 ERO arrests, and 71.7% involved people with criminal convictions or pending criminal charges. That doesn't settle the policy debate, but it does complicate the idea that it's indiscriminate. And criminal history isn't one thing. It can include serious violence, and it can include lower-level offenses. The real question is, where do you want enforcement to happen? Inside a jail or out in the community?
Explain that. Why does limiting them in jails lead to more street arrests?
It comes down to the immigration detainer. A detainer is a request. Notify ICE before release and hold someone for up to 48 hours beyond release so ICE can take custody. It's meant to be a controlled handoff. When jurisdictions don't honor detainers or don't share release timing, ICE relies more on at-large arrests. Those encounters are harder to control and feel more disruptive. More door knocks, more workplace pickups, more community friction.
And what about the other half of the agency? We mentioned HSI earlier.
This is the part people forget. HSI is ICE's criminal investigative arm, and the map on screen makes the point. Offices in 235 U.S. cities, plus 90-plus offices overseas. That footprint exists because the crimes are cross-border. They aren't just checking visas. They work child exploitation, human trafficking, cyber and financial crime, and drug smuggling. In 2025, they were part of major seizures of precursor chemicals shipped from China and destined for cartel meth production. You can argue about structure, where HSI should sit, what ERO should prioritize, but you can't just delete the capability without leaving gaps. Other agencies cover pieces of it. HSI is built to live at the trade, border, and transnational crime intersection.
So your argument is that the structure exists for a reason?
Precisely. The workload, civil and criminal, is real. We can debate policy all day, but we can't pretend the underlying need just disappears.
Look at the split screen. Criminal investigation on one side, civil deportation on the other. When those missions live under one roof, the deportation side tends to dominate, and the guardrails get thinner. That's how you end up with a detention system that expands faster than oversight. And the human cost shows up in deaths that shouldn't happen.
Let's look at the numbers. What is the specific human cost you are citing?
The Guardian reported 2025 as ICE's deadliest year in more than 2 decades. 32 people died in ICE custody, tying the 2004 record. And in January 2026, an autopsy in El Paso ruled a detainee's death at Camp East, Montana, at Fort Bliss, as a homicide caused by asphyxia from neck and torso compression. That classification doesn't by itself prove criminal intent, but it does mean the death was caused by another person.
That is an active investigation, and we should wait for the facts. You cannot dismantle an entire federal agency because of individual tragedies, however painful.
It's not individual when the oversight failures are documented for years. DHS's Inspector General has said ICE's inspections and monitoring don't ensure consistent compliance or systemic improvement, and some problems go uncorrected for years. And the watchdogs are being weakened, not strengthened. In March 2025, DHS moved to eliminate internal officers that handled civil rights and detention complaints. You can't fix what you refuse to examine.
You also mentioned a constitutional friction earlier. What did you mean by that?
I mean the memo reported by the Associated Press in January 2026. It says officers can forcibly enter homes using only an administrative warrant, rather than a judge-signed warrant, to arrest someone with a final removal order. That blurs a bright line. The home is where constitutional limits are supposed to be strongest. Turning civil enforcement into forced entry operations creates fear and invites mistakes.
If you abolish ERO, who enforces the law? Do court orders just become suggestions?
Abolish doesn't have to mean no enforcement. It can mean replacing the current structure, like the ICE Security Reform Act of 2025, HR 673, which would separate HSI and redesignate the remaining civil mission. Let HSI do its critical criminal work as a standalone entity, without being fused to detention and deportation politics. Then rebuild the civil side with narrower authority, real oversight, and far less reliance on mass detention. So enforcement is lawful, predictable, and accountable.
We end where we began. One agency wearing two very different missions. On screen, it's the same split every time. HSI on one side, ERO on the other. Structurally, that tension doesn't disappear. HSI operates like a federal detective shop, chasing transnational crime, while ERO runs arrests, detention and removals. And HSI officials and agents have argued that the ICE label can complicate partnerships in places that avoid working with immigration enforcement. So what's the path forward? As of late January 2026, the debate clusters around three structural routes, like the three branches you're seeing on screen. First, the status quo, with incremental reform. Keep ICE intact, adjust oversight and policy, and fight it out through appropriations. That's especially live right now because current federal funding runs to January 30th, 2026. Second, the split. Proposals such as HR 673 would run HSI as a separate entity inside DHS, while the remaining immigration compliance functions stay behind under a redesigned ICE. Third, a detention reset. Keep the umbrella, but rely less on beds, more on alternatives to detention, tighter standards, and clearer firewalls between investigative work and civil enforcement. Whatever your politics, abolish, expand, or reform, the core question stays the same. Should criminal investigations and civil deportations share a single chain of command? That decision will shape how Homeland Security is staffed, funded, and trusted in the years ahead. Thanks for watching.